This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm John Berman. This is CNN's special breaking news coverage. Just moments ago, candid and incredibly at ease. Former President Jimmy Carter opened up about his health and a new serious battle with cancer. Mr. Carter says that 4 spots of melanoma were found on his brain. He begins radiation treatment for that today. Doctors made the discovery after removing a cancerous tumor from his liver. This was the president's reaction after he learned that the cancer had spread.
I felt that it was confined to my liver and that the operation had completely removed it, so I was quite relieved. And then that same afternoon, we had an MRI of my head and neck, and it showed up that it was already in 4 places in my brain. So I would say that night and the next day until I came back up to Emory, I just thought I had a few weeks left. But I was surprisingly at ease. You know, I've had a wonderful life. I've had thousands of friends, and I've had an exciting and adventurous and gratifying existence. So I was surprisingly at ease, much more so than my wife was.
Surprisingly at ease. And I have to say, if you had the chance to watch this full news conference, it was simply arresting. The poise, the grace, the intelligence with which the former president talked about his prognosis, it was astounding. Here to discuss right now is Dr. David Spigel. He's director for the Lung Cancer Research Program and a medical oncologist. Also joined now by CNN's presidential historian Doug Brinkley. Dr. Spigel, let me start with you here. Let's start with the medical news here. 4 spots of melanoma on the brain. We did not know that until just a few minutes ago. He begins radiation treatment for that in just a few hours. What does that mean, spots of melanoma on the brain, and what's generally speaking the prognosis?
Well, you know, in general, we hear cancer in the brain, we think the worst, and it's never a good thing. But in this case, I was encouraged that these spots are small. He mentioned 2 millimeters in size. You know, that's about the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen. These are spots that often we'll just watch. If patients are not having any symptoms, we won't even treat them. In this case, his radiation oncologist, who actually is a friend, a very good doctor, he's in great hands, we'll probably treat that with a very focal form of radiation therapy. Sometimes we use this term radiosurgery, but actually there's no cutting. This often is 1 or 2 treatments, and then you're done. So I'm guessing from his description he'll have 4 treatments spaced out over several weeks. I think he'll do very well with that.
Dr. Sanjay Gupta joins us right now, our chief medical correspondent. Sanjay, you were in that room, and before I get to the medicine here, let me just ask you about the experience itself, because watching from afar here, as I just said, it was arresting to hear the ease and the peace with which this former president spoke about the cancer and the battle he now faces.
Yeah, I agree, John. It felt that way in the room as well. He walked in, you know, punctual as always. He's known for that. Pair of jeans, you know, a sports coat and a tie, and sat down, made a couple of jokes initially, and then got right to it and described it in a lot of detail. Wasn't looking at notes really, and just described what has been going on with him over the last several months. There were a few points, John, that were just, as you say, arresting. At one point he said, look, when I first heard about this, I thought I just had a couple of weeks to live. That was hard to hear, and I think that there was definitely a hush in the room when he said that as well. But he also talked about the fact that he's now going to pursue this aggressively. He started a type of chemotherapy, as you were just hearing, a sort of a boosting of the immune system drug. And he's going to start this radiation this afternoon. He had to have a mask fitted to his face because this is a type of radiation that's going to pinpoint these lesions in his brain. So he's very much moving forward. So it was a rather long press conference, took a lot of questions, but it was an emotional one, I think, as well, John.
Sanjay, let me ask you this, and I'll get to Dr. Spigel in a second on this subject. The former president said he's going to step back from some of his day-to-day responsibilities at the Carter Center and the work he does for Habitat for Humanity. He's going to step back a little, but he's still going to stay engaged some. He's still going to be part of meetings. He still wants to focus on what these centers in his charity work, what it's doing. Is it reasonable, Sanjay, to think that he can stay involved while engaged in this medical battle? He's 90.
I think so. You know, he's 90, but he's an active 90, John. You know, I think you and I have talked about this. Age in terms of chronological years, obviously important. Age in terms of your physiology, much more important. There are 50-year-olds who act like 90-year-olds and vice versa. So he's been very busy. He was in Guyana in May that he had to cut that trip short because of this illness, but you know, he's been moving around. He planned on going to Nepal, John, this fall for Habitat for Humanity, take a plane to Kathmandu, and then another plane further south. And he said he still wants to do that if he can coordinate it around his radiation treatments. So, you know, he certainly wants to do these things. He's proven that he can, even at his age. I think right now it's just going to be a question of doing these things without interfering with his treatments. He is going to pull back a great deal, he said, from the Carter Center, but he clearly has a lot more to do. You know, one thing I'll just tell you, John, a moment from the press conference, one of the things he's really known for, is some people will know, is the fight to eradicate guinea worm. It's a terrible disease in many parts of the world. He said at this one moment, he said, "I hope the last guinea worm dies before I do." He was making a little joke, but it just, again, gives you an idea of just how focused and passionate he remains about these things.
And Dr. Spigel, another thing we got an idea of in that news conference was just how smart President Jimmy Carter is. Look, he's been politically controversial at times over his career. I don't think it's ever been a question about how intelligent the man is. It sounded like he could be a cancer surgeon. It sounded like he could be an oncologist based on how much he knows about cancer. Part of that reason is because of a very serious family history.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. You know, that he's an important part of the team. So he defers. He mentioned in his press conference that he has a radiation oncologist, a medical oncologist, a surgeon, all helping, leading his care. But it's important to note, not just because he's a former president, but he's a patient. And so he'll be very important in making those decisions. As you mentioned, he's already well-read, well-versed in his own family's medical history. He knows a lot about cancer and medicine and healthcare in his work at the Carter Center. So I think I was joking a little bit earlier. One of the challenges as a provider is kind of getting out of the room. You want to be in the room and talk to him all the time and get his thoughts on things. So I'm very hopeful for him.
He has an interesting time ahead of him. His family history is with pancreatic cancer. I know he was probably concerned that it may have spread to his pancreas. No sign of that just yet. I want to bring Douglas Brinkley. And Doug, you've written extensively about President Carter over the years, a biographer of the former president. And I suspect you are probably the least surprised of anyone to see the poise with which he is now facing this battle.
Absolutely, wasn't surprised at all. That's the way Jimmy Carter is. You mentioned the pancreatic cancer in his family. Mr. Earl, his father, died of it. You know, his mother, Miss Lillian, who was worked for the Peace Corps, helping people with leprosy when she was 70. But brother Billy and you know, his two sisters, Gloria and Ruth, they all died of pancreatic cancer. Some people think of because of the pesticides that had been sprayed in Sumter County, Georgia, when Jimmy Carter was away for his long naval career. Later, those pesticides were banned, but it's not been proven. But Carter often told me that he thought there may have been a link in a connection to that. But Jimmy Carter's Christianity is very real. It's in his heart. And I've looked at his private correspondence he shared with me, where he writes letters all the time, even now, around the world, asking for political prisoners to be released, documenting human rights abuses all over the world. Only Eleanor Roosevelt has injected the concept of human rights into our global parlance with the dignity and quality of Jimmy Carter.
And now many of that correspondence being returned to Jimmy Carter. He noted how he has spoken to every president and former president still alive for the last several days. The Bushes called together. He said that Secretary of State John Kerry actually called, and it's the first time they've spoken in a while. He was joking because right now President Carter's foreign policy not necessarily always in line with the current administration. And Douglas, he spoke at this point, as he's 90 years old, facing this cancer battle, reflectively about his life and about his career and about his regrets. And there was this remarkable moment in this news conference where he spoke about the Iran hostage crisis, which was perhaps it was the low point of his presidency, one of the low points for the United States, period. And he spoke about the failed hostage rescue. Let's listen to that soundbite.
And anything you wish, I'm sorry, that you had not done or that you'd done differently?
I wish I had sent one more helicopter to get the hostages, and we would have rescued them, and I would have been reelected.
He went on to say, you know, if he had to choose the Carter Center over being reelected, he would choose the Carter Center. Then he went on and joked again, maybe I could have had both, though. Look, it was interesting to hear him talk about that, Douglas, because it was such a raw time in his career and in this country's history.
Well, he desperately regrets that hostage rescue mission didn't work. But one thing we have to keep in mind, because people constantly do a kind of backhanded compliment to Jimmy Carter, you're a great ex-president, which means you weren't a very good president. In truth, it's all one of the life of Jimmy Carter. Without his presidency, if he didn't put human rights into the forefront of State Department policy as president, he wouldn't be able to be the human rights warrior who goes on to win a Nobel Peace Prize. If he didn't do the Panama Canal Treaty as president, he wouldn't have been able as ex-president in 1989 to say General Manuel Noriega ran a fraudulent election in Panama and have all the Panamanians believe Jimmy Carter. If Carter hadn't recognized the People's Republic of China, Carter did that, not Nixon and Kissinger, and create a relationship with Deng Xiaoping as president, he wouldn't be able to go now and election monitor in China like he's done in recent years. He was the first president, sitting president, to go to Africa while president when he went to Nigeria. He had denounced apartheid when he was president. So it's all part and parcel, the presidency and the post-presidency, of an extraordinary American life dedicated to honesty, decency, and democracy everywhere on the planet.
Yeah, very notable at this time. And Douglas, of course, have to be careful not to eulogize him, because he made clear today he's not done yet. He still has much more work he wants to do. So, Dr. Spigel, let me go finally to you here. I asked about the prognosis, and you said, you know, it's strong, it's bright, potentially. But again, he is 90. He's talking about radiation on the brain, and he's talking about cancer. They don't believe it's spread anywhere else, but there might very well be more cancer cells in the body.
Yeah, you know, ultimately it's hard, right? When you're talking about an advanced cancer, it doesn't matter where it's from. If it is spread to different places, in general, we associate that with a poor prognosis. I have to admit, there was a little bit of a relief when I heard of the actual diagnosis, melanoma, simply because we've had such breakthroughs in the last several years.
Can I just ask, we think of melanoma as skin cancer.
That's right.
So how does it end up on the brain?
So melanoma, like any cancer, can spread. Cancer can spread through the bloodstream, through what's called the lymphatic stream, actually the same system that our immune cells travel through. What's been exciting, John, has been the number of breakthroughs in what largely was regarded as a cancer that couldn't be treated. Our traditional therapies, chemotherapy, radiation, were very hard on patients. But just in the last few years, therapies to boost your own immune system to fight cancer are showing great results in melanoma. In fact, at our major cancer meeting this past June, we saw results with the very drug that he was discussing, pembrolizumab, allowing patients to live longer, to live better than we've ever seen before with traditional therapies. I'm very optimistic.
All right, Dr. David Spigel, Douglas Brinkley, and Sanjay Gupta, who had to go, I thank you all for this. I think we're about to see a very public battle with cancer. Former President Jimmy Carter begins it really this afternoon. Thanks, gentlemen.